Okay, am I recording? Yes, I'm recording. Okay, let's get started then. Is everybody ready? All right, so I want to welcome you one and all to the Virtual Residency Workshop 2023. This is our 9th annual summer workshop. I'm super proud of that, but next year it'll be our 10th annual, and so I'll be even prouder. So we're going to dive right in, and I'm starting with an overview of the workshop and the workshop series and some background, and of course our new program on cyber infrastructure facilitator certification. We'll talk about all of that. So webpage, if you haven't been, you can just go to this URL and it's got the slides. There are Google Docs for every session if you want to make comments. I cannot see the comments in the Google Docs because I don't really have an effective mechanism to pop up the Google Doc during the thing. So if you want me to see a comment or a question, there are two ways to give me the comment or question. Number one, put it in the Zoom chat. Number two, unmute yourself and say it out loud. Those are the only two ways that I'm aware of to make that work. The workshop email address should auto forward to me, but it's virtualresidency2023@gmail.com. I set that up yesterday, tested it. It appears to be working, so we should be good to go with that. Okay, video conferencing. I think pretty much everybody is accustomed to Zoom now, but here's the details in case. The main thing is when you are not speaking, please mute yourself and turn off your camera. There are people who are on relatively modest internet connections, and they're happier if there isn't a lot of video traffic to deal with. So I'm here, I've got my camera on, but let's try not to overdo that. And I should warn you, if you don't mute yourself and that's causing a problem, we'll end up muting you on your behalf. If you don't have a Zoom account, you have to go get one, or you can just use the phone and download the slides. We recommend using the most recent stable version of Zoom, blah, blah, blah. Y'all know how to use Zoom. If you aren't talking, then mute yourself and turn off your camera. If you want to do the audio only, the email that I sent out has tons of phone numbers. These are toll numbers, but most of us within our own country don't have to pay for service within the country. So there are phone numbers within many countries, not every country, but at least many countries, and that's all in the email. Same thing for non-USA. Same idea, and here's the URL. Again, keep your camera off, keep your mic muted, except when you're talking. Okay. So here's an outline, but I want to dive right in because we're always very short on time. I have 80 zillion slides and 70 more minutes, and so I'm trying to be real good about this and not eat too deeply into our break time. Okay, so this is an experiment. Everything is either somewhat tested, everything is under tested, or brand spanking new, but you are the 9th cohort, so I no longer say this is a complete experiment. We have done this a few times, so we have at least some sense of how to do this. But this is we're pioneering a way to develop the next generation workforce in research, computing, and data, or cyber infrastructure. It's up to you to make this a success. We know you can. What we really want is for you to ask questions, to talk, to have a conversation in the Google Doc, but especially in the Zoom chat and by voice. Volunteer your information, what you've thought about, what you've done, what you've experienced, what you've observed. Let us know what you're thinking. Because in the end, you have to run this thing, not us. Okay, so what is a cyber infrastructure facilitator? Well, before we do that, we better define cyber infrastructure. So what's cyber infrastructure? It depends who you ask. The reason we're favoring this term, there's really two reasons. The first is it has a nice short acronym, CI, so that saves on space in our slides. But The other reason is a lot of this activity was originally funded and to some extent continues to be funded by the National Science Foundation, and cyber infrastructure is the term that they like. So what that term means depends who you ask. If you talk to the network engineers, they'll tell you that cyber infrastructure just means the network. If you talk to the supercomputing folks, they'll tell you it's the supercomputers and the network. If you talk to anybody else, it's the supercomputers, the network, and their thing. If you talk to the cybersecurity folks or the information security folks, they'll tell you that cyber infrastructure is whatever stuff you've got that needs cybersecurity on it. So there's no good definition of cyber infrastructure. We're just going to sort of be fuzzy about it. Another term of art that we're seeing a lot that I like is research computing and data. Sometimes you'll hear me shorten that to just research computing. Okay, so what's a facilitator? Well, way back in the distant mists of, I want to say 2012 or 13, a bunch of us got together to try and figure that out and get some money to develop that profession or that occupation. And Marone Livney of University of Wisconsin-Madison came up with the term Advanced Cyber Infrastructure Research and Education Facilitator, which he abbreviated ACI-REF. And that term of art was around for a while. Now we've just shortened it to CI facilitator or research computing facilitator. These are folks who work with users, primarily researchers, somewhat educators, to help them to make their research better, more productive, have higher aspirations based on using research computing and data. And at a typical institution, you have a very small group of people who are responsible for the whole institution. Very small could be one, a handful. There are a small number of large institutions that have lots of money where they have a substantial number of facilitators, but that's by far the minority. And in fact, at some institutions, someone is both the sysadmin and the facilitator and everything else. And it's one person responsible for research computing for the entire institution. And we'll sort of dig into that in a little bit in various sessions. So these folks, some are faculty, either current or former. Some are postdocs, current or former. Research staff, like research scientists, research associates, current and former. IT professionals, so particularly at non-PhD granting institutions, the most common way that responsibility for research computing for cyber infrastructure gets assigned is the CIO goes, yeah, okay, Janet, you're in charge of research computing. And then Janet, who up until 2 minutes ago was an enterprise IT professional, is suddenly now the research computing lead for the institution. And it can be students, grads and undergrads. And so we've come up with this notion called the 5 facings, where it's hyphen facing. So facing is an adjective, not a noun. So researcher-facing cyber infrastructure professionals like facilitators, their job is to help researchers do research using research computing. System-facing folks like system administrators, network engineers, data-facing like research data librarians, software-facing like research software engineers, and then strategy and policy-facing folks like me who are the cyber infrastructure lead for their institution, or among the leadership for their institution. What are they not? Well, not so much not as not necessarily. Now, it happens that I am a computer scientist. That's what most of my degrees are in. But that's actually the least common thing. So people in research computing tend not to be computer scientists. By far, the most common is not computer scientists. And this is largely because until relatively recently, with the rise of machine learning, computer scientists typically weren't that interested in research computing as a field of study. Now, of course, there's a lot of consumption of research computing by computer scientists for machine learning, but until about 5 years ago, it was not that common. Not necessarily a sysadmin, and in fact, I would argue probably most CI facilitators are not sysadmins. This creates a certain amount of confusion because people think, well, you are a research computing professional, so that must mean you know a lot about machines. And that's not necessarily true. not necessarily a researcher. So while many cyber infrastructure facilitators are former researchers, some of them are former enterprise IT professionals. That's pretty common. Not necessarily an IT professional, not necessarily an enterprise IT professional. So a lot of cyber infrastructure facilitators are researchers or former researchers. And so they never were in the IT trade. And particularly, probably the majority are not enterprise or former enterprise IT professionals. What do we do? Well, we work directly with both STEM and non-STEM researchers, scholars, and creatives to advance the computing and data intensive aspects of their research or scholarship or creative activity. And as we'll talk about, I think, a little bit in the, excuse me, the facilitating for non-traditional disciplines session toward the end of the week, I think on Thursday, then a lot of this, the humanities folks in particular, for example, and certainly the arts folks, do not refer to what they do as research. Although we in the trade tend to use research as sort of a catch-all. What do we do? Well, our goal and our job and our role is to amplify researcher productivity. And how do we do that? There's a bunch of ways. And several years ago, as we were writing a grant proposal about this that I'll talk about a little later, we came up with a list of the things that facilitators do. And so this is just a repeating back of that list. Adapting researcher workflows to cyber infrastructure and teaching how to use those cyber infrastructure systems, bridging between the tech folks and the researchers. So helping researchers have fruitful conversations, for example, with sysadmins or network engineers, anticipating the new and emerging needs that researchers will have, helping STEM researchers to port their codes to new platforms, teaching about cybersecurity and compliance. So for example, if you've got folks doing personal health information, so HIPAA regulated data, you've got to help them learn how to do that in many cases. The folks who've been doing that sort of thing for a long time, they probably already know how to do it, but there are a lot of people getting into this stuff, not just HIPAA, but for example, controlled unclassified information, whatnot, where this is all very new for them and it becomes our job to help them learn how. Developing strategies for specific use cases. A lot of what we do is idiosyncratic to the specific research project we're working with. And what we develop for that specific project isn't necessarily going to be valuable for other projects, even projects in the same discipline or sub-discipline. Teaching data management, providing training opportunities, both local and national. So, you know, if you are going to provide software carpentry workshops for your researchers, things like that, or you're going to glom on to some of the Access, formerly Exceed, training, national training opportunities, things like that. And then, you know, your local introduction to using our local cluster supercomputer talk. Helping researchers to evaluate what's the right technology for them, recruiting new users and use cases, going to your institution's administration and advocating and fighting for what your researchers need. This is what they need. These are the machines they need. This is the help they need, et cetera, et cetera. Helping your researchers create publications and posters and so on and so forth. And helping them write their grant proposals, and particularly the cyber infrastructure related parts of their grant proposals. So what qualities do you need to be a good facilitator? Well, James Cuff and I years ago came up with this little diagram. We whiteboarded it, and then I think he's the one who turned it into a little cartoon here. But basically, we've got two axes here: loving people and loving things, loving technology and loving research. Those are our two axes on this. If you love people and you love research, you become faculty. If you love people, if you love things and you love research, you become a researcher, right? If you love both, you're definitely going to be faculty. If you love people and you love technology, you go work at the service desk, you can help people all day using the technology. If you love things and technology, you become a sysadmin, right? And right smack dab in the middle, where you love people and things, you love research and technology, that's where we live, right smack dab in the middle. Okay. So who cares about this, right? Why do facilitators matter, or to whom do they matter? Well, the researchers sure care, because research computing only ever gets harder to use. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but it only ever gets harder to use. And if it's only ever going to get harder to use, then we desperately need people to help researchers use it. And this is something that the national community has recognized, and the federal government has recognized, that we've got to help people learn how to use these technologies, and doing it in traditional ways is not going to be that effective, because the problem is that each research project's needs are fairly idiosyncratic. And if you teach in a general way, 90% of what you teach is useless to 90% of the people there. But for each of those people, which 90% is useless is random. So traditional ways of doing this aren't very effective. So these are lots of quotes from various reports saying this matters. But the message is, if we want researchers to be successful using research computing, we have to provide people who can help them to use research computing. So this has been growing for a while. And by the way, so I stopped counting at 2019, and I was given an opportunity last year to do a new count of how many institutions have CI facilitators and how many CI facilitators there are. This is based on looking at three groups: the Campus Champions, the Virtual Residency, and the Campus Research Computing Consortium's researcher-facing group. And you'll hear a lot about Campus Champions and CARC as we go through the week. But I started on it, and I came to realize that the labor cost of figuring out how many of us there are was so unwieldy that I gave it up as a bad job. The difficulty is you've got three different groups tracking the data in three completely different ways, and reconciling all of that data in a way that would be reasonably comprehensive and would get us a pretty accurate head count is so much labor, it's effectively impossible. Okay. So some background on the virtual residency. This goes way back to actually goes back earlier. I think our first meeting was probably late 2011. We started talking about this. But by 2013, there was a team of institutions around the country led by Clemson. They submitted a $33.5 million proposal to the NSF for facilitators at each of these institutions over 4 years. There was funding in there for advanced networking. There were some extra components in there. One was the virtual residency, and I think it was Marone Livni who coined that term, the guy who also coined the term ACI RAF. And there was also a component for EPSCoR and so on, and we're not going to get into the details of that. But unfortunately, the NSF came back and said, we don't have $33.5 million for this, but we'll give you, I think it was 1/7 the money for half the time and for half as many institutions. You cut who you're going to cut. So I got an awkward phone call from Clemson. Hey, Henry, you're out. And then things got interesting. So then the NSF founded their program called Campus Cyber Infrastructure. It's been known under various names over the years, but it's been pretty consistent. And we got one of the hardware grants in 2013. And then in 2014, the NSF said, we're going to have a sub-program where we'll give you money to hire someone to be a cyber infrastructure professional. They were particularly looking for network engineers. But we said, okay, well, we'll do that, but we need something to make a differentiator, something that was exciting that would make us stand out, because we figured correctly, as it turned out, everyone and their dog would submit a proposal for this particular subprogram, because the funding agencies rarely offer to give you money for non-researcher salaries. And so we figured everybody would be putting this proposal. What could we put in that would be differentiators? And part of it was to glom on to this ACI ref project that had been funded. But then there was this little tiny piece, 10% of the budget, $40K over 2 years, little tiny thing to do this, to do the virtual residency. Well, and you can see here, right? These are the actual objectives of the grant. And this little thing here was the one that we said, okay, so we'll do this little thing. And boy, did they love that. Oh my God. The reviewers just gushed. They thought it was swell. They just thought it was the best thing ever. And then we actually ended up putting it in other proposals, and they said, oh, we love this. And we just want to make sure it's not just the 6 institutions in the ACI ref grant. So here's kind of the track record there. It's always been over 90%. The 2016, our second year, it was barely over 90% because we actively recruited from that project, including for speakers and such. But since then, the thing has just so exploded out of control in terms of the number of institutions, in terms of the number of participants. Huge thing, right? And those 6 institutions in that original grant, tiny fraction of the total. Okay. Now, why don't we just do what the enterprise folks do for training? Why do we bother to have a virtual residency? Well, the answer is the enterprise IT training world is designed for, let's say, 3 to 4 orders of magnitude bigger than our community. And, you know, at that scale, the way you do things has to be completely different than the way we do at this itty bitty scale. So enterprise, we're talking about millions of people. In 1970, it was 500,000 people and 0.5% of the workforce. By, what is this now, 9 years ago, it was 4.5 million people, so up by a factor of 9, and about 3% of the US civilian workforce. So it's been growing by better than 5% a year, doubling every 13 years. By the latter part of this decade, we can expect it'll probably be on the order of 10 million people. That's pretty big. So at that point, you're going to have degree programs, you're going to have professional certification programs. There's huge resources devoted to enterprise IT training. And that doesn't even take into account that now all but 2 states in the US now have data science degree programs, master's programs, bachelor's programs, PhD programs. And of course, they also have graduate and in some cases, I think, undergraduate certificate programs. Data science has just exploded out of all proportion. That happened over a very short period, by the way, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it was almost unheard of. Now it's incredibly commonplace. Research computing is not millions of professionals, it's thousands. So headcount today is probably on the order of 2,000, give or take, 1,500, 2,000. So there aren't any degree programs, there aren't any certifications, there aren't any resources for updating your skills. So informal education is what we have. Okay, so what's the virtual residency? So we teach people like you, pre-service and in-service cyber infrastructure facilitators, how to do research computing facilitation or how to do it better. But then we also have our hidden secret agenda, and it's important to have a hidden secret agenda. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So what's our mechanism? Well, we've been doing this workshop every summer, once a summer, since 2015. So this is number 9. University of California actually adopted this and did a couple of them in the late 2010s, and then went on and shifted to some other topic areas, but continued the program for a while. I don't know whether that's still underway. Then we also have these planning calls. Many of you have been on these calls. So the virtual residency is community driven. So we provide a framework, but after that, everything we do, it's the community deciding what we should be doing. And the community developing these capabilities. We meet at the SC Supercomputing Conference every year. Now, obviously, during COVID, we had to stop doing that temporarily. We paused that, but last year we picked it up again, and we'll continue to do that. Then we've had 3 apprenticeships, 2 of which are active. We did a grant proposal writing apprenticeship. We stopped doing that. That's currently on hiatus because we got the grant, and I'll talk about that. We did a paper writing apprenticeship. We've been doing that every year and published several papers as a result. And then now, because we got the grant, we've been running this grant running apprenticeship. And the model for all of these is the model of how I learned to write grant proposals. The way I learned to write grant proposals was I had a buddy who was good at writing grant proposals here at my institution. And so he invited me onto some of his proposals because I had, useful information about cyber infrastructure, and he wanted to include that in his proposals. And he would invite me just to come to his office and sit next to him at his PC, and he would type and he would think out loud about how to structure the proposal, how to express what he was getting at, and so on and so on. He basically wrote grant proposals in front of me, several of them, while thinking out loud and explaining as he was going why he was doing the things he was doing. And it worked great. And I was able to learn from that and to write successful grant proposals. And my track record is reasonably good now. I thought to myself as we were getting into the virtual residency, well, why can't we just do that over video conferencing? Why can't we just do that for anybody who wants to learn? So we started writing grant proposals as a group, and we would just have I think it was every other week, we would do a call for an hour and we would write a grant proposal together. And we did that, call it unsuccessfully 3 times. And then the 4th time we got the grant. And that's the SIFTED grant, the certification program that I'll talk about a bit later on. Same thing with the paper writing apprenticeship. Once we had figured out that the grant proposal writing apprenticeship was working, then we were doing the workshop one year. This must have been 2018. And we were discussing the grant proposal writing apprenticeship. And I said, I wonder why this wouldn't work for paper writing. And we realized it would. So Dana and I started a paper writing apprenticeship. For those of you who haven't yet met Dana Brunson, you should get to know her. She's amazing, a wonderful national leader in research computing professionals. And so we started doing a paper writing apprenticeship, and we successfully published 3 papers out of 5 apprenticeship rounds that we've done. And then once we got the grant, we started doing a grant running apprenticeship, how to run the grant. And all of these have been very successful and helped people learn how to do these things. Way back in 2014, 15, when we wrote the proposal, honestly, nobody had ever been stupid enough to try and do this before. And we were just the right level of stupid. So we decided we would go ahead and give this a try, and it worked amazingly. All right, so why does this matter? Well, the problem is that the skills that cyber infrastructure facilitators need are not in books. They're not taught in the usual training opportunities. These are skills that partially the reason they're not taught in those ways, or at least not in a way that facilitators would be aware of or have access to, is because they're primarily professional, interpersonal, soft skills, right? And there's no commonality between backgrounds for CI facilitators. They're not coming out of a degree program. They're not coming out of a formal training program. We all have different backgrounds. We have strong experience with our own discipline, which more often than not is not computer science. And for many of the folks is IT, including enterprise IT. But most facilitators haven't been faculty, although some have, or even currently are. Some have little or no research experience, especially if they're enterprise IT folks who transition into research computing. Even if they do have a strong research background, they typically have no experience or very little experience with research outside their own discipline. And when we started this, there were no programs for this, not locally, not regionally, not nationally. Nobody was doing this. It's like that old joke about everybody complains about the weather, but nobody ever does anything. So instead of complaining about the absence of training for cyber infrastructure facilitators, we decided to do something about it. Now, admittedly, we had that mercenary reason of we wanted to get that $400,000 grant from the NSF. And this was what it was going to take to get that grant. But it turned out that this was by far the most important, valuable, far-reaching, and let's be honest, fun outcome of that grant. The other problem is, in the old days, when I got hired in 2001 into my job, the job I have to this day, when I got hired into that job, nobody knew what the job was supposed to be. And so they didn't have an expectation, and I had time to figure out and to decide what should the job be. So I did. That luxury is gone. I had years to figure out what I should be doing, and I could evolve it over time. Well, now if you get hired as a cyber infrastructure facilitator, you got to hit the ground running the first day, right? You got to be productive right out of the gate. I could not have done that back when I started because I had no idea. Neither did anybody else. None of us knew. The reason I got put in charge is I had been at a supercomputing center ever. I had done my grad work at one. That was the sum total of my expertise. But that put me ahead of the rest of the folks at my institution. Now we don't have that luxury anymore. Now we've got to figure it out right from the off. Okay, so who are we? Well, so far, and I ran the numbers over the weekend, so far the virtual residency has served almost 1,400 people from 466 institutions in every US state and 4 US territories, plus 18 other countries on, I'm saying 5 continents, because I'm not sure whether I get to count New Zealand as part of sort of Oceania. We have not had someone from Australia yet that I'm aware of. So I'm not sure whether I can count the 6th continent. I despair of Antarctica, but including 22% of the 4-year minority serving institutions and 14%, 1/7 of, so 1/9 of 4-year minority serving institution and 1/7 of all minority serving institutions. 125 non-PhD granting institutions, 122 institutions in every EPSCoR jurisdiction. EPSCoR is the established program for the stimulation of competitive research. It's for states and territories in the US that receive less than 0.75% of federal research funding dollars. So Oklahoma is an example. At the high end, Iowa, but it goes all the way through, Alaska, Wyoming, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam. It's a very large group of jurisdictions, states and territories. And then 60% are campus champion institutions, and it's 80% of all the campus champion institutions. I reran those numbers last night. Or 2 nights ago, rather. And that includes for all of the virtual residency activities, not just the workshops. There are a few institutions that have participated in the calls, but not in the workshops. So who's here? These numbers are laughably out of date. As of about 5 minutes before we started, we were at, I believe it was 489 pre-registrants. So I'm guessing we will cross 500 before we're out. And that number on institutions is probably a bit off as well. I think that's gone up a little bit, probably 230 or so. Now, not everybody who registers shows up because it's free, so you don't have anything, there's no skin in the game, but we expect we'll probably get pretty decent attendance. And I noticed there are 138 of you at a time that for many of you is a bit inconvenient, particularly if you're on Pacific time. This is a very inconvenient time, and yet here you are on the very first day, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. So now, why is it hard to help researchers use research computing? The problem is that research computing is always, always, always getting harder to use. And that's for several reasons. One is broader and deeper usage. That is, more disciplines are doing computing and or data intensive research now than ever before, right? I did not expect to be in a conversation with an English faculty member about the importance of textual analysis to the work they're doing, but that's a thing now. Ubiquity. So within the discipline, a higher and higher proportion of the researchers are using research computing. Complexity, the machines are getting harder to use. The hierarchies, the storage hierarchy is getting deeper and deeper. So the latest thing is high bandwidth memory, but we're everything from registers to tape, right? And then the parallelism is getting more hybrid. So GPUs, FPGAs, other accelerators, those will come up from time to time during the week. And then the final thing is the conceptual distance. So here's my phone, right? So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the typical new research computing user came to us from a Windows laptop background. And that was a pretty far distance from command line, Linux, batch, remote, shared, right? Which is large scale. Okay. Thank you, David. New Zealand is counted as Oceania, so I guess we could say 6 continents. I have no plans for Antarctica, though if somebody on the Wind or Rover team wants to sit in on this, they're welcome to do so. That was a very large gap from laptop to, call it, supercomputer. Now that gap is even farther. Now the gap is from handheld, from cell phone or tablet to supercomputer. The problem is that their tolerance, the researchers' tolerance for how long it takes to learn this stuff is still the same. 1 hour. If you can't get them productive in 1 hour, they quit. They're not interested. Okay, well, so more and more institutions have on-campus cyber infrastructure. The Carnegie classification updates every so often, and I didn't notice back in 2021 that they'd done an update. So my numbers are now as of the 2021 Carnegie classification data set, which they seem to update every 3 to 5 years. So now 94% of very high research or R1 universities have on-campus research computing resources. To the best of my recollection, of the remaining 9, 2 of them use commercial cloud only and provide support for that. About, I think, 4 or 5 of them use on-campus resources at another institution in their state or within their system. And then there's 1 or 2, I can't remember the details about. But 9 out of 146 don't have on-campus research computing resources for the R1s. For high research activity, R2s, a bit over half have on-campus research computing resources. In the top 100, 200, whatever of the US News rankings, you know, they do the top national universities, all but 2 of the top 50, all but 5 of the top 100, all but 21 of the top 150, and all but 44 of the top 200. That's pretty impressive, right? And by the way, so on the US News rankings, they don't take R1, R2, they don't take any of that into account, right? So some of these are high research activity, some are very high research activity, some are moderate research activity. Most institutions have been participating in the virtual residency. Sorry, and I should be careful what I mean by that. Most research intensive institutions. Okay, so in the top 100, 200, whatever, all of the top 25, all but 1 of the top 50, all but 12 of the top 100, all but 27 of the top 150, and all but 50 of the top 200. And bet your bottom dollar I've been pestering them mercilessly year after year. And every year, a few of them decide this is the year that we're going to finally start participating in the virtual residency. So we have quite a few, over 40 new institutions signed up. Not all of them in these lists, but and likewise, so R1s, 95% have participated, and R2s, 62%. That percentage is higher if you only look at the ones that have on-campus research computing resources. Okay. In 2021, we evaluated the 2020 workshop to get a feel for, are we doing a good job? And we published a paper about it. So we looked at the demographics, and what we found was for the virtual residency, 30% of participants on average are women, or at least in 2020. By the way, this dovetails pretty reasonably with the numbers that I've sort of tracked independently on my own. So this seems to be correct. Compare this to the US population, it's not that great because the US population is 51% women. But on the other hand, compared to all computing and IT occupations, it's actually a little bit above. And compared to research computing, right, which I use the SC conferences as a way of measuring that, they report 13 to 14% women attendees. So we are more than double what the research computing community as a whole is. So that's pretty impressive. For traditionally underrepresented populations, in the US population, that's 34%. For the virtual residency, it's 21%. So less than the national population, but I can't find any data on research computing, but for all computing and IT occupations, it's 10%. Virtual residency is more than double, right? For all computing occupations, not research computing, which historically has been significantly less well represented by both of these populations. So the team who did the evaluation for Exceed and is now doing it for the Access program, they did that evaluation. The worst score we got was 3.9 on a 1 to 5 scale. The best was 4.4. And what we found was there was one case where women rated one session 10% lower than men did, but otherwise no statistically significant differences. For underrepresented minorities, there were a few cases where there were small but statistically significant better outcomes for underrepresented minorities than for the non-minority population, or for the population as a whole, rather. The non-minority, excuse me. So slightly better. I don't know if it's meaningfully better, statistically significant. The other thing is y'all are busy. You got things to do. If this was a waste of time, you wouldn't show up. And if you showed up, you wouldn't stick around, right? I said about 5 or 10 minutes ago that there were 138 of you. Now there are 147. So not that many of you are dropping out, but lots of you keep coming in, right? So there are, and this is, sorry, I didn't update this one. I missed to update this one on my slide, but about 80% of you of your institutions, not you necessarily individually, have participated in multiple activities, and about 2/3 of you have participated in multiple kinds of activities. So not just the workshop, but the calls and the meeting at SC and so on. Okay. There's a large professional ecosystem, and we encourage you to join these. And in fact, I've done a good bit of recruiting over the years to pester people mercilessly to join some of these groups. We encourage you to get in touch. We'll help you get in touch with these groups. These are wonderful groups doing amazing work in various aspects of cyber infrastructure professions, and we encourage you to get involved in as many of them as fit your needs. Okay, so this year's workshop, I'm not going to walk through every minute of the week. It's all in the slides, though. So we've got, so this overview, then I've got another talk, Effective Communication. Then Bruce Mason from here at University of Oklahoma will give a talk about what it's like to be faculty, which is very handy information to have when you are facilitating research. Using research computing. And then Dylan Perkins will be doing cyber infrastructure user support in the later part of the afternoon. And there's lots of good stuff all week, really amazing content being presented by really amazing people. You're going to have a great time. You're going to learn an enormous amount. And all the way through the whole week, We're looking forward to some really great stuff, working together to help everybody learn how to do all of this amazing stuff. Okay, your agenda is trivially available on the web. Just go to that URL and you're good to go. We have 32 presenters from 28 institutions, which is almost exactly the same number as we had last year, although most of the people are first timers for us, or at least a lot of them are. And so we're very excited to have new folks and some returning folks as well this year from all over the country. We are very seized with the importance of representing not only different regions of the United States, and by the way, if we could get folks from other countries to participate as speakers, we would love that, but also different institution types. So we've got R1s, we've got R2s, we've got non-PhD granting, all different kinds of institutions from all over the country. And not all the institutions that are providing speakers are academic. Some of them are, for example, government labs. How do we pick our speakers and panelists? We wheedle and needle and beg and plead on our knees until enough people cave that we can stop wheedling and needling and begging. So I think a lot of you, unless you only registered in the last week or two, a lot of you got the pester emails. So and many of you responded, so we appreciate that very much. We only pester you because it works. If it didn't work, we would stop doing it. But what we have found over and over and over again is if we ask you once, you won't respond. If we ask you 20 times, you'll respond the 19th time. So we do what works. We are perfectly happy to continue to pester you until you cave. Okay, so what's our goal? Why are we here for this workshop? Well, the first thing is we want to learn how to work with researchers who are using cyber infrastructure. We want to learn how to find them. We want to learn how to help them. But the hidden secret agenda goes beyond that goal. That's sort of the short-term goal, is to learn how to help researchers use research computing to do better research, bigger and better research. But the evil hidden scheme that I rub my hands with glee about, the evil hidden scheme is to prepare you to be institutional research computing leaders and ultimately to start thinking about becoming national cyber infrastructure leaders. We are leading a national program. We started a program. We thought, okay, so we've done introductory, intermediate, and advanced workshops within the virtual residency program. We define introductory as you're at least relatively new to cyber infrastructure facilitation. We define intermediate as you're still learning facilitation skills, but now you have a decent amount of experience at it. And advanced is we're preparing you for institutional cyber infrastructure leadership. Well, we created a separate program called the Cyber Infrastructure Leadership Academy to teach people who are institutional cyber infrastructure leaders to become national cyber infrastructure leaders. And the way that we did that was we got a bunch of national and senior cyber infrastructure leaders and said, okay, help us, right? Because we don't know how to teach any of this stuff because we're not national cyber infrastructure leaders. So you teach us how to do this. And that program, we've done a couple of workshops. We've got a mini workshop coming up at the PERC conference in July. And then we're working on a workshop, a day-long workshop for the fall. Okay, what are we trying to do? And what aren't we trying to do? We aren't trying to teach you a lot of technical content. There is some technical content. And every workshop, there's been some technical content. We've been very careful to limit the technical content we teach to technical content that isn't being provided elsewhere, that our constituency, research computing facilitators, need, but that others aren't teaching. Because if you can learn it from someone else who's already doing a good job teaching it, then us teaching it would be redundant, be a waste of everybody's time. So we only have a modest number of technical sessions in this workshop. We do have some, but they are not the sort of technical sessions you would get at other workshops. What we are trying to teach you is how to be a cyber infrastructure facilitator, a cyber infrastructure facilitation professional, and ultimately to prepare you to be a cyber infrastructure leader. So why would we want you to be cyber infrastructure leaders? Well, the problem is the cyber infrastructure leaders that we have today aren't going to be around forever. You know, I was 42 when the older of my two kids was born. I'm going to be dead for a long time. So I need to raise my kids so that after I'm gone, they'll be fine. Well, the same principle applies to the cyber infrastructure professional community. The people who are the national and even institutional leaders now are a bunch of gray heads, right? And that's good. That's how it should be. The people with the wisdom based on experience and so on and so forth. All of that is good, but they ain't going to be around forever. They're going to retire and so on, various reasons, but they'll be done at some point. And all of us, each and every one of us is going to get dragged kicking and screaming upstairs. We got to be ready. And the only way we're going to be ready is if we've worked together to learn how to do this, because figuring it out on our own is much harder, much more labor intensive, much more time consuming, and we're not going to have the luxury of time, right? When your boss's boss retires, your boss will take their job and you're going to take your boss's job, right? Everybody's going to get dragged kicking and screaming upstairs. We've got to be ready. Okay. Some of the folks who've been involved in the virtual residency program already know how to do research computing facilitation. But they took a long time to learn it, and we don't have that luxury anymore. Like I said earlier, we've got to hit the ground running. You get hired as a facilitator, you're expected to be productive and valuable the first day. And who is better positioned to be a cyber infrastructure leader than someone who has worked with consumers of cyber infrastructure across the full spectrum of research disciplines? Who is better positioned for leadership than someone who knows what the constituency needs? We are the natural population of candidates for institutional and ultimately national cyber infrastructure leadership. We're not the only population by any means, but it's a very natural fit for us. We got to get ready. Okay. Now, in service of that, and as part of the grant proposal writing apprenticeship, we developed a proposal for a national program, not only to train people, but to certify that they are cyber infrastructure facilitators. Okay. So we got $300K from the NSF for a pilot grant. Pilot meaning we have no idea what we're doing. So I know Dirk is on. I don't know whether Dana is on right now. But Dirk and Dana and I are the PIs. And then you can see we have a huge group of senior personnel, some of whom are on the call, and many of whom have been involved with the program. And what we're doing is we're creating a set of badges, and those badges will lead to professional development certification. So certification here, not in the sense of a matriculated graduate or undergraduate certificate. It's not that. It's not a certificate. It's more like Red Hat Certified Engineer or CISSP or something along those lines. So it's a non-matriculated informal education professional development certification to show that you have trained and have actually made good use of the training for being a cyber infrastructure facilitator. So certified cyber infrastructure facilitator, training and development. I am happy to report that this acronym SIFTED When you Google it, we are the #1 non-sponsored link on Google. Now, we don't pay Google, so they put a sponsored link above us. We are not the Canadian Centre for International Fisheries Training and Development, but we are now the when we first started the program, the fisheries folks were #1 and we were #3, but now we're #1. So we are the first of its kind non-matriculated professional development certification. And it's not a certificate of participation. You have to take exams. And we're going to be doing the very first exam this week. We've never done this before. This is brand spanking new, first time out of the box. Okay. So the way this works is we have a collection of badges, which we are in the process of developing. We've developed some of them. Some of them are still pending. And then certification comes from having specific collections of badges. Right? Why aren't we doing a degree? I mentioned this before. There just aren't enough of us to go around to justify creating a degree program at any institution or even a certificate program at any institution. If there were 100,000 of us, this wouldn't be our problem. Somebody would have created a degree program. If there were 10,000 of us, I don't know. But at a few thousand of us, it ain't going to happen. Right? And here's an unhappy example to sort of compare. So Texas State Technical College created an associate's degree program for HPC system administrators. And they ran that program for a few years and then they shut it down. The problem is nobody knows what HPC is, right? So they switched to cloud and they created a program for that. And that's gone too. I think they now have something for machine learning or something along those lines, but they got rid of both of those degree programs because I assume there wasn't enough uptake. And particularly with HPC, how does someone know they want to be an HPC sysadmin when they don't know what HPC is, right? Why would they sign up for that program? So what are the objectives of SIFTED? Well, from the perspective of the facilitators, provide training and proof of mastery in facilitation skills. And cultivate and expand the community, right? Because we're a small enough group that we need to lean on each other. We can't be constantly pulling the ladder out from under each other. Maybe if there were 10,000 of us, we could afford to do that. But at 1,000 or a few thousand of us, we can't do that. From the perspective of the cyber infrastructure centers, increasing uptake of cyber infrastructure. And then from the perspective of the researchers, research computing is hard. And so by providing people who can help with research computing, we make them more productive, and ultimately we make it so that their aspirations can grow. One of the fun exercises I like to do with research teams is, so imagine that you had an infinitely large, infinitely fast supercomputer. What research would you do with that you aren't doing today? And it's not that we'll ever get to that point, but if we start from there and work backward to what's possible, that's going to get us a very different outcome from starting where we think we are and working our way up to what's possible next year. Okay, so how do we do this? Number one, we got to figure out what skills are most valuable for facilitation. We have a pretty good idea at what we call level 1. We have a pretty clear sense of what those skills are. So then develop for each of those skills a training module, an exam, and a scoring rubric, and then pilot test that, right? And then certification comes from having specific collections of badges that as a group merit certification. Test those methods of badging and then evaluate whether that succeeded. So the challenges for certification: what skills do the facilitators need? How do the facilitators build credibility with their researchers and their institutions? How do we train enough of them to meet the need, and the need continues to grow? How confident are we that what we're doing works, and how do we sustain this beyond the near term? Now, what we can't do in this $300,000 pilot program, we can't do multiple levels of certification. We can only do the level 1, the introductory level. And we can't cover the needs of industry. You got to figure industry is going to need at least an order of magnitude more than the non-commercial space. We are not in a position to work at that scale yet. Again, not on this first 300K project. Okay, so this is going to be the very first time we do the badging. It will be during the intake interview practicum session, which is Wednesday mid-morning. We have, I can't remember the number, it's more than a dozen judges ready to do the badging. And you don't have to do anything. There's no exam or anything. Just show up for that session and the judges will decide whether you get the badge from that session. So, and it's completely free. You don't have to pay anything. You don't have to do anything. You just show up and do the session, and then people will watch and decide whether you get the badge. Okay, now, all of this, why is it only you? Why do we want you? And in particular, it's great that you're a CI facilitator, but we want you thinking deeper into your career path. We want you thinking about being a CI leader. Why should you be a leader? Well, I don't do anything unless I have two things: good, warm-hearted, virtuous, wonderful reasons for doing the thing, and wicked, selfish, base, mercenary reasons for doing the thing. I need both. The first, because then I can look myself in the mirror, and the second, because then I can feed my kids. But in order to accomplish that, in order to convince you, here are the good, virtuous, warm-hearted reasons. Number one, you have good ideas. They're based on your experience and your observation. By the way, if you're brand new to this, you will have good ideas, right? It comes from training and experience. And your good ideas, if your institution implemented them, that would help your researchers, right? You love helping them. And in particular, you love helping the researchers use computing to make their research bigger and better, right? Because otherwise, why would you get into this business? And you know that your institution doesn't really, your institutional administration doesn't really understand research computing. Unless you lucked out and your president happens to have come from a research computing background, which is low probability, but does happen. Unless you've lucked out, or maybe your VP for research or your provost comes from a background like that. But unless you've come from that sort of background, or you have lucked out in that way, your institutional administration needs help understanding research computing, particularly because research computing is so very different from enterprise IT. And we'll talk about that in the next session. And you're really good at doing these things, right? The wicked, selfish, mercenary base reasons. You get paid better if you're a leader. The world always has a shortage of people willing to be grown-ups. I think many of us have been in that relationship where one person is a grown-up and the other is not. And I will confess to you, not in my current marriage, but in a previous relationship, I was the not adult. And I had to outgrow that. But you can imagine how frustrating that could be. The number of people willing to be the adult in the room is always too low. Always, always not enough grown-ups. People will pay you to be a grown-up, and they will pay you very well to be a grown-up. And that means being a leader. It's also better job security because of being a grown-up. Because again, the fraction of people, lots of people want 5 o'clock, the whistle blows, they go yabba dabba doo, and they get in their car and they go home and they're done and they leave it all behind and they take zero responsibility for anything that happens outside of business hours. There are plenty of people, there's always plenty of people who take that approach. The world always has a shortage of people who are willing to take ownership, who it's more important to them that their constituents, that their researchers be successful, that's so important that they're willing to go the extra mile. The world needs those kinds of folks. Now, why would you want to be a national cyber infrastructure leader? Well, the good, warm-hearted, virtuous reasons. The national community needs your ideas, and you'll have a chance to influence research computing and the national research computing agenda. And the wicked, selfish base reason is because then other national leaders will notice that you're a national leader, and that will advance your career. Okay, so I showed this before. These are this is the professional ecosystem. These are all the groups. We encourage you to join these groups, and we'll talk more about them as the week goes on. Now, some of you may have experienced imposter syndrome. I know I do. You kind of feel like everybody else here knows what they're doing and I do not. There's a wonderful theory out there called basket case theory. And basket case theory posits that everyone is a mess. You just don't know them well enough to know the specific way they're a mess, but we're all a mess. Everybody, or at least almost everybody, suffers from imposter syndrome. If you are suffering from imposter syndrome, that makes you normal, not an imposter. Okay, good. It's good that you're suffering from imposter syndrome. That means you're paying attention. That means you want to do even better than you're already doing. So don't let the fact that you feel that way get in the way of you doing really good stuff. Okay, so how can you make your mark in the research computing world? You can invent good things and you can make good things better. So I'm going to use myself as an example. What did I invent? Well, way back, literally the very first day that our center, our supercomputing center, opened its doors, the very first thing was I taught a workshop on supercomputing. We didn't have the name supercomputing in plain English. Back then I called it supercomputing in science, but by the next year I'd come up with the name supercomputing in plain English, teaching supercomputing to people who didn't know much about computing. But we came up with more and more of these. The One Oklahoma Cyber Infrastructure Initiative, our tape archive business model, which is very unusual. And then, of course, the virtual residency. This is not a complete list, by the way. These are just some of the things that I've done. And then things that I've helped make better, like the National Computational Science Institute, which is run by the Shodor Education Foundation. They have been doing parallel computing workshops since the early 2000s, and I started participating and helped make them better. I didn't take responsibility for it, and I'm not certainly taking credit for making them better, but I helped make them better. The SE Education Program, which I led in 2011, I helped make better. The Campus Champions that Dana Brunson and I co-led the umbrella over it and helped make better. These are things that I helped make better. I invented some things, I helped make some things better. And those are ways you can make your mark. You can do either or both, right? And this is always growing. So my institution is part of a group called the Coalition for Academic Scientific Computation, or CASC. And it's mostly mid to large academic and government HPC centers across the US. I think primarily R1s, there might be a few R2s, and then the government labs. When we joined back in 2004, there were around 35 member institutions. Now there are 100. So it's been quite a lot of growth. But on the other hand, there are 279 R1s and R2s, so there's still lots of growth potential there. The need for institutional and national cyber infrastructure leadership is always growing. And like I said before, you need to be ready. We all need to be ready to be in charge, because the people who are in charge now are not going to be in charge for that much longer. Every single day, 10,000 baby boomers reach age 65. Now, I am just barely Gen X. I was born in 65, right? So I am just barely not a boomer. I'm at the high end of age for Gen X. I'll turn 58 in a few months. But all of us are going to constantly be yanked upwards, because as the folks in the baby boom generation are reaching retirement age, we can't demand that they stick around forever and continue to lead. They have as much right to retire as anybody else. We've got to pick up that mantle and carry it. We've got to carry the ball. It depends on us. And ultimately, this is the best job ever. And the reason it's the best job ever, okay, let me tell you a job I would hate to have. And it's a service job. It's indoors. It has all of the pluses that a person who doesn't want, to destroy their body or to be exposed to the elements, whatever. But the job I would never want would be airport gate agent, right? Because you only ever see people when they're miserable or angry. What a terrible job. That would be so depressing. I could do that job for like a week and then I would have to quit. Maybe I'd make it through a week, right? But in this job, in cyber infrastructure facilitation, cyber infrastructure leadership, any of the cyber infrastructure professions, every single day, you get to see in a very concrete way how the work you're doing helps other people. They've done studies to see what makes someone happy. Money doesn't make people happy. Rich people are just as likely to be miserable as poor people. Fame doesn't make people happy. Looks don't make people happy. What makes people happy is being useful to others. That's what makes people happy. And in this job, every day when you go into work, you see that you are useful to others. Okay, here's some papers, including papers we've published, papers about the virtual residency, including papers we've published as part of the virtual residency paper writing apprenticeship. Dina says, there is, however, a minimum threshold of money that is necessary, basic needs covered. Yeah, definitely. I agree 100%. But you can be rich beyond all dreams of imagining, and it's still easy to be miserable. You're miserable for different reasons, to be sure. Okay, these are the various grants that have paid for these workshops over the years in one way or another. They've paid for the virtual residency. And I've just got a couple of minutes for questions. So shout them out, put them in the chat, however you want to do it. Any questions? I will give 5 brownie points to the first person who asks a question.
My question is, how do you manage not to blow your voice out with that high of an information density in the past hour? I'm kind of blown away by how much information you gave us.
Well, just wait until the next hour,
right?
Because I'm doing 2 in a row because I'm an idiot. I don't manage not to blow my voice out. By the end of the next session, my voice will be blown out. The real test will be Tuesday. I am giving a talk on Tuesday. That's when we find out how bad this went. Link to the certification program, please. So we'll provide that information. Casey, can you put that in an email to me? And I'm not going to bother to ask people the question, do you have my email address? Because I assume everybody's been getting my spam. Can you address the types of research facilities that are preferred to get faculty using cloud, grid, cluster, et cetera? So it really depends very much on the faculty member, on the particulars of the research they're doing and the computing they're doing. And this is one of the challenges associated with being a facilitator, is helping researchers to identify the resources that best align with their specific needs. Because you can have a researcher come to you and say, I want to do X, Y, Z, and that is totally inappropriate for the resources that your organization provides. That doesn't mean you don't help them. It means you don't help them by steering them to your machines, right? And some people will come to you and say, well, I've got a laptop problem, a laptop scale problem. Can you help me with that? And that's separate from, so what facilities they're on depends on what they're trying to do. The specifics, and fairly deep specifics of what they're trying to do. And I know that's a non-answer, Lee, so I apologize for non-answering you, but we'll leave it there for now. I might have missed this. What's the timeline for the certification for Sifted? There isn't really a timeline. We're building the modules now. So we'll roll them out gradually. We're not going to just do a big dump. We'll just roll out badges gradually. Any interest including K-12 IT folks as part of cyber infrastructure? We've had K-12 folks participate, and I think that's been pretty successful. Some of them have come back to multiple activities, not always multiple workshops, but multiple virtual residency activities. So we're always open to that. We haven't pursued it at large scale because the number of K-12 institutions that do call it larger scale research computing is pretty modest. So it hasn't been a huge part of our constituency. Okay, thanks for your amazing introduction. From a tech landscape perspective, what do you find to be most interesting about this moment in research computing? Cloud computing, AI, quantum, or something else? Right, so I try not to get too deeply involved in what's the biggest thing, what's the best thing. A lot of this is what aligns best with a specific researcher's needs. So we haven't yet had a researcher come to us and say, the right solution for me might be quantum. But we've got a ton of people lined up to do machine learning and doing it already. And I think that's just going to grow and grow and grow. Cloud computing, I think we're going to see more uptake of over time. That's a whole separate discussion, and we don't really have time to go into it here. I'm already a couple of minutes over my time, and I do want to try and answer as many of these questions as I can. Can you address scalability of one individual supporting many institutions? I think the biggest single difficulty in a case like that is if they have one boss, they're going to end up doing what that boss's preferred constituency, they serve that boss's preferred constituency. If they have many bosses, it's just really unwieldy to have many bosses at the many institutions. So I'm not sure what the answer to that question is. There are a number of these cyber team projects going on or have recently completed that have done experiments in this area, and some of them I think have been very successful in that. So sharing cyber infrastructure facilitation can be successful. I think it has to be done somewhat delicately. Okay. What is the fee structure for certification? Right now, the answer is 0 because we have the grant. When we run out of grant money, and most of that is going to go into the exam grading because that has to be done by real live human beings. We're not doing like a lot of multiple choice stuff that can be auto graded. It's mostly short answer and things like that. So the short answer today is there is no fee structure. In the long run, it'll probably be somewhere between $50 to $100 per exam. We're trying to keep it at a reasonable price, total price. But that's not a promise, that's a guess. Okay. All right, I think that's it for questions, and I'm only 4 minutes over my time. Thank you, everyone. We will be taking a break of about, I think it's 25 minutes and starting at 10:45. It will be me again, so you're stuck with me 2 in a row, but I will be doing effective communication, how to talk to researchers about their research. So I look forward to seeing all of you. We're going to keep the Zoom session live. I encourage you just to stay on, refresh your beverage, take a bio break, catch up on your email, whatever you need to do. And we're going to come back and start the next session at 1:45. And I'm going to stop the recording right now.